Um, just another quick introduction. My name is Emily Costanzo. I'm a 7th grade math teacher at Chippewa Junior Senior High School, which is a small school just outside of Akron in Ohio. I've been teaching math now for 7 years. So I've done 6 years at the 7th grade level and then 1 at the high school level as well. So I started utilizing Snorkl, started discovering it, messing around with it in November of last year, and then really started to utilize it when we came back from Christmas break and really revved up into state testing and reviewing and all that stuff. And I've just loved it ever since. So I'm excited to share kind of 3 main teaching techniques that I use and what I used to do, and then how I utilize them now with Snorkl and how I made it better. So the first one, and normally the most obvious when we think of math classrooms, is the traditional classroom. So like the traditional teaching styles. I know that when I was going to school, it was very much lecture style. Here's your notes. Here's your examples. Do these examples. If you don't understand it, that's too bad. We're moving on. And so obviously when I became a teacher, I wanted to revamp those traditional style teaching methods. There is a ton of times that I have used traditional teaching lecture style. I think it's a necessity in math classrooms. But like I said, I wanted to make it better. So it's very much like giving students a note sheet, and I do, we do, you do kind of situation. So sharing the main topics, getting vocab words to them. I'll go over an example. We'll do an example together. And then the students will do an example individually. The problems that I was struggling with was the individual practice. If I am doing like a lecture style classroom that day, I only get the feedback from one student at a time, which is something that I really struggled with because you have anywhere from 15 to 25 kids in your class. I need to be able to hear from every single one of those kids. So there was a big lack of opportunity to share. Then when we went into like more in-depth individual practices, like a game, like on another day, so like a Kahoot game or a Google slide activity or a scavenger hunt around the room, or even if it's just like a practice problems at the whiteboard. Again, I was only getting feedback from either kids that I got to talk to that day or kids that were sharing. So I wasn't getting the opportunity to hear from every kid. I also don't think that it was being placed into their long-term memory as well. So a big struggle for me is stuff that I went over in September wasn't sticking come January, February when I needed to build off of it. Or every teacher's favorite saying is, well, we've never learned this. You're like, yes, you have, because I taught it to you, but that's fine. So I needed a way for the information to really stick into their long-term memory. And the best way to do that is to have them verbally explain their reasoning. So that is why I started utilizing Snorkl. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's a quote by NCTM that basically just says that when students are articulating and justifying their own mathematical ideas through their own understanding and explanations, while also providing rationale for their answers, they understood it better, they understood it well, and they had more future success in math classes, which is so key when we teach math because, like I said, everything builds off of itself. So as a 7th grade teacher, if my students aren't understanding the basics of solving equations or aren't understanding integer operations, we're not doing our job here. And then the 8th grade teachers are like, what's happening? And then we have a big disconnect and we're falling apart. So that is one of the big reasons why I needed this to stick into their long-term memory, and one of the reasons why I decided to start using Snorkl. So not yet. There's a video that's going to play. But on the next slide, there is an example of one of my students who is using Snorkl in my classroom. And this example is a state release question. And you'll be able to see that it gives that individual support, but I'm also really understanding that they are getting the vocab words because I hear the explanation, and they're getting that individual feedback. So it's going into their long-term memory and they're getting that feedback. So we can go ahead and watch this next example.
So first you see that the line goes through the origin. So then you know the constant proportionality will be a whole number. So then you look up to see when the line intersects, and then you see it intersects at 2 4. So then you divide 4 over 2 and get 2. And then that is your constant proportionality.
The one thing that I love about this, and I'm going to continue to talk about throughout this presentation, is the fact that this student scored a 3 out of 4, so got a great grade, but it still is pushing them to do better. Snorkl, the AI in Snorkl is really just trying to advance those students and get them to do better. But I was also providing very supportive feedback, and I can quickly see as a teacher, like, yes, my student is understanding this. The explanation is great. We're putting this into our long-term memory. So that way later on, when they go to write equations or whatever else they need, they understand what the constant of proportionality is. So my next teaching technique that I utilize in my classroom is a blended learning style. And blended learning is exactly what it sounds like. It is a mix of a ton of different teaching styles and methods all blended together in one classroom. So most of the time when I do this, it is in a station rotation kind of style. So I have anywhere from 4 to 6 stations going on at one time, and kids work through 2 of them normally in a day, depending on what the activities are. These stations range from a teacher-led station, group work, individual work. It could be work at the boards. It could be technology, no technology, a huge mix of everything. When I did this at the beginning of the year, my biggest struggle was that there's only one of me. And if you're a teacher, you understand that struggle so much, especially in a class of 15 to 25 kids. Like, you feel like you're spread so thin. So with me only being one teacher, I needed a way to be able to reach all of my students at one time and give that feedback and give that help all the time. So there was only me as a teacher was really big struggle, because if I was doing the teacher-led group and I needed to go help an individual group, I took away time from them, but then I also needed to provide that feedback and that help to them. So it was really just a struggle of, like, I can't be everywhere in one time, which was frustrating for me. It was frustrating for the kids. So we had that problem rise up. There was also a lack of instant feedback. So a lot of times in math, it's very easy to say that, or to get really frustrated when you're doing something wrong, but you don't know why. So I see that a lot with 7th graders. So being able to be like, hey, this is where we're going wrong, let's fix it, and not have to wait for me, it was something that I really needed. Another thing that I noticed that I needed that I didn't do enough of in my classroom was advancing the students who are ready to advance. If I saw a student got a correct answer, I don't know how they got it. I don't know what they did to get that. I don't know if they copied or if they're using the right vocab. So making sure that the students who are getting it right are using the correct vocab, are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if they're ready to advance and we're supposed to be pushing them in the right direction to advance, that we are doing that, which is something that Snorkl does a great job of as well. There is another quote that I have for you that says that students who get instant feedback, and this quote is from the Journal of Educational Psychology. Students who get instant feedback get a 20% higher success rate on tasks that are in the future than students who don't, which is great. And of course, I'm a math teacher, so I'm going to throw some stats at you guys. So we're at a 20% higher success rate if these students are given that instant feedback, which is super important. So again, that's why I started utilizing Snorkl, was because Snorkl provides all of that instant feedback. And then it also is making sure that when the students are getting it correct, they're getting it correct for the right reasons. They're using the correct vocab. And we were really pushing the students that, hey, you know how to do it, but are you using the correct vocab and all of that stuff? So on the next slide, I'm going to show you guys
4 times 2 is
Thank you. I'm going to show you an example of a student who got the incorrect answer and how the AI gives the feedback for that. Then I will show you an example of a student who got the correct answer, but then how Snorkl really is like, hey, how can we make this better even though you got it correct? And then my last example, or my last video for this section, is a fun new feature that Snorkl is going to be coming out with that I'm super excited to share with you guys. It's called Snorkl Coach. And I'll explain it when I get there, but super exciting. So here's an example of a student who didn't get it correct, and then we'll talk about that.
4 times 2 is 8, and 4 times -4 is 16x. Plus -3 is 19x. and then you put the 65 down, you put the 8 down, it's a negative 8. 8 minus 65 is 57, and 19 goes into 57 3 times.
So what you can see that they tell the AI says that, hey, you got it incorrect. They got a 2 out of 4. The one thing that I really love is that they're telling them what they're pointing out the mistake, but they're pointing it out with a question, which is something that, again, I love. It's like a teacher in every kid's computer, because you're actually like, this is the exact same way that I would do it too. Instead of like their friend being like, oh, you missed this negative, or, oh, you just did this wrong. Like the Snorkl is like asking the questions, which is great. But there's so many times where I've given students equations like this and they've done it 3 times and they still don't know where they mess up. So that can get really frustrating for the kids. So getting this feedback, knowing where they messed up, but getting that support through questions is super important. So my next example is a student who did this question correctly.
First, I did 4 times 2, which is 8. Then I did 4 times negative 4x, which is negative 16x, minus 3x, which is negative 19x. Then I put a line in between the equation, or equal sign, and then I canceled out 8 and put negative 8 on both sides. 65 minus 8 is 57. Then I brought down negative 19x and divided 57 and negative 19x by negative 19, which the answer is x equals negative 3.
So here for this example, if I was like giving a paper pencil activity, or if I was doing any other kind of activity, to be honest, I would have no idea that this student was saying canceled out 8 instead of saying like the inverse or inverse operation, blah, 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 blah. So the student got it correct, but the student is obviously ready to really focus on that vocabulary and making sure that explanation is perfect, which is something that I really love. So on the next slide is the feature called...
First, I did 4 times.
Yep, and then this video will just play. There's no sound for this video, but it's called... Yep, perfect. Snorkl Coach. And here you guys can see that I am able to, and this is just me doing this, trying to imitate my 7th graders as well as possible, but it's just a chat feature that allows students to chat with that AI. So the students don't have to wait for me to come over. If they're confused and they have no idea where to start, they can start this chat and it will walk through the steps for them. And when I say walk through, I'm not talking about giving them the answers. I am very much talking about this chat is just like a teacher. It is asking questions. It will break down the problem for you or for them and ask them to do it step by step. So it's just a really great feature that I'm super excited, and I'm sure you guys will hear more about it throughout the day. But whenever it does come out, I'm super excited to be using this in my classroom. So it's an awesome feature. I do get this wrong on purpose, just so everybody knows, just to kind of see what the feedback would give us. So here, like I got the equation wrong and it said like almost there. Remember that the snorkeler is diving down 30 feet. So then I corrected it and they said that's correct. So what is the answer? Again, I got it incorrect. So then they were like, okay, let's go through it step by step, which is exactly how I would do it if I was working one-on-one with the student. So then finally the student gets to the correct answer, but then don't forget, they still have to be, they're still responsible for going back and explaining that as well. So knowing what they did wrong throughout the process is going to help them with their explanations and getting the correct explanations later on down the road. So super excited for that to come out. And I think it's just a great thing for that instant feedback and for that support throughout the classroom that one teacher can simply not provide. All right. And then the last part, or the last thing that the last teaching technique that I utilize in my classroom comes from the book, Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics. If you're a math teacher and you have not read this yet, I highly recommend. Mine's sitting right here, and it is like worn and used and has sticky notes all over it because I love this book. It has so many great ideas. So I'm going to share some of those great ideas with you. And then I'm also going to talk about, again, how I use those ideas and incorporated Snorkl to make it even better. So the idea behind this book is we are starting by putting students into randomized groups that students see are random. So the students are walking into your room, you're randomly putting them into groups. I like groups of 2 to 3. So we're putting them into groups, and then we are letting them work at the whiteboards. I guess it could be any vertical, non-permanent workspace is what we like to say in the book. But my room is behind me, and I have a bunch of whiteboards here. So we love to utilize the whiteboards. And then we're giving the students high quality questions. So it's not just, hey, can we solve this equation? It's not just, can we do these integer operations? It is high quality questions. It is problem solving, thinking skills that get the students communicating about the math. So we love the group work. We love the communication because, as we know, the communication is super important, which is why we love using Snorkl. But we've all been, or I've been at least, in groups where people in the group don't always do their fair share. And I've seen it in my classroom time and time again, where students will start complaining, this person's not helping me, this person's not doing this. So I really struggled with that lack of student accountability, not knowing what was happening when I wasn't with that group. And again, there's only one of me. I can't be with every group at every time. So getting that lack of student accountability was something I would struggle with. Again, I told you, I like my numbers. I like my stats. So I found another stat by NCTM that states that 74% of students reported that they felt more engaged and understood the math content better when they were able to discuss their problems with their peers. So be able to verbalize their understandings with another person, bounce ideas off of them, is something that I really like to utilize in my classroom. So I wanted to keep this communication and collaboration going while also holding each student accountable and knowing what they were doing and what they were understanding and taking away from it. So that's why I decided to utilize Snorkl within this. And I kind of have 2 ideas how this could work in the classroom, and 2 different ways that I've done it. And then on my example on the next slide, it's actually just me doing it. But we'll talk about that when we get there. So the first idea is having students come into your room and putting up a problem on the board. And I do have an example of like a problem that I would give my students, and put them in their partners, their groups, and then have them start working on the problems. They'll talk through that problem, they'll solve it, and then they would take a picture of their work. So with their Chromebooks or devices, whatever they're using, take a picture of that work. And then individually, so break off their partners or their groups, they would go and they would explain that problem. So that problem would be an assignment that I would have created in Snorkl, and they would upload their work, their picture work, into the Snorkl activity and then have to explain it individually. That way you would understand, like, hey, was that student paying attention? Was that student working in their group? Were they understanding what they were supposed to be understanding? So that's way number 1 that you could do it, is using the question that you had from that class that day. Or you could approach it the same way. So start it, the problem, have them work in their groups, going through it. And then you as a teacher check their work when they're done. So say, hey, yep, that's correct. That's good to go. Now that you guys are done with that, I want you to go onto Snorkl, and I have a similar activity uploaded, different question, maybe different approach, but same idea. Let's see what you understand now that we're done talking in the group. And then having them do that individually. From there, they could then come back to their group and watch each other's videos and make comments on each other's videos. And it's just like a great way to be like, oh, I didn't think about that when I explained mine, but I remember us talking about that. I just left that out. Like, that's a great idea. Or so on and so forth. So then listening to each other's explanations at the end and going from there. And you could utilize that collaboration and communication with either approach that I gave. So on the next slide, here is an example of a problem that I might give my kids at the beginning of class that would have them work through it. So this one is just students buying school supplies for the beginning of the year. There's 2 different stores. They're both offering discounts. So we need to buy different supplies of each. So we're talking about backpacks, notebooks, pencils, and then they're getting a 25% off discount of that one. At store B, they're buying the same supplies, again, different cost, and then they're getting a $15 discount. So not only are we working with percents, we are working with integer operations, we're working with decimals, a lot of different ideas applied here. So it really gets the kids thinking about what they have to do. So then it says like calculate the total cost of store A and B, and then determine which store offers a better deal. So from here, you could either then have the kids take a picture of their work and then individually explain it. Or what I did for this one was I found an example that Snorkl already provided in their bank of questions, which the math bank of questions are phenomenal. I love them. So if we go to the next one, you'll see one of the questions that I did as a teacher, and see my explanation for it, and you'll see how it relates. So I started by finding off what 30% of 200 was. So I took 30% and turned it into a decimal, which is 0.3. And then I took 0.3 and I made it into a fraction, which was 3/10. I then decided to use the giant one method and figure out how many times 3/10 will, like what equivalent fraction 3/10 is to 200, like something over 200. So when I set that up, like I did in the picture, I multiplied it by 20. So 3 times 20 gives me 60. So I know that 30% off of 200, or 30% of 200 is 60. So then I did 200 minus 60 and got 140. For airline Y, I know that a fourth of 240 means that I just have to divide it by 4 to figure out what a fourth of that is. So I took 240 and divided by 4, and I also got 60. But when you take 240 minus 60, you get 180 instead. So I know that airline X is going to be cheaper at 140. So this isn't a question that I created. Again, this is a question that came from Snorkl's Bank of Questions for 7th grade math. And you could see how closely it is related to that question I gave them, but obviously different, still working with percents. This time we threw in a fraction, but a great example, which is something kudos to Snorkl for their questions because they're all awesome. They are all problem solving, multiple steps. And so I love using the bank of questions here. And again, there's a picture of me doing this at the board, this example, so you guys can see like, hey, we take a picture and then we can upload it, and that will work too if you really like the kids working at your whiteboards or whatever it is. So a great feature. Another feature that is really nice is that the AI will actually like grade the picture too. So my 7th graders, this happens all the time. They'll just say, see picture, for example, which is obviously something we don't want to do. But if you go to the next video, see the picture for answer. So again, I was just trying to imitate what my 7th graders would do, but it still says that I got it correct and I did no explanation. So you know that obviously this is not something that I promote in my classroom, don't want them to do, but you know that it is grading their picture and it is actually looking at their picture and seeing that they're doing the work as well as the explanation, which is something that is so beautiful. We love that. So not only getting a good explanation, but also checking the work in math is great and is a cool feature. So hopefully you guys were able to take some examples away from today's presentation. And it was awesome to be able to present for you guys. So here's my contact information if you ever have any questions and you want to reach out. I'm always open and love to share ideas with you guys.